Welcome to another edition of Throwing Out Some Heavy Light. My name is Jamal Binden. I'm the chair of the board of Movement Omaha for Race Equity, which is an organization that deals with anti-racism issue, racial diversity, accountability, and transparency. The group has been around for about 10 years. And we've been involved in doing community forums, hosting engagement sessions, and trying to get some of our public and elected officials, as well as nonprofit directors, to get more in the community to talk to grass tops, grassroots, and also credible messengers. Today we have a special guest in the studio with us, as we would say. Dori Bush is a community advocate, and she once lived in Grand Island for many years. She is now a resident of Lincoln, Nebraska, and she experienced the loss of her husband Dave February the 9th, 2014. I met her when we was facilitating Table Talk in Grand Islands many years ago. Dori was a member of the board of directors of the YWCA, and also their mission is to address racism and anti-racism event and promote diversity. She was engaged and helped with the various issues in that community in Grand Island through that time. In September the 6th, 2022, I lost my wife after 43 years of marriage. And I like to say I'm probably the most public monogamous talking marriage guy with 4 kids born in the institution of marriage all the time. As a role model, I like to talk about that. But Doris sent me a condolence letter and a small book of reading titled Hearing After Loss, Daily Meditation for Working Through Grief. And it was also very helpful and helped me deal with some of the grieving process. After a few conversations over the years, Doris shared me that she had purchased about 380 copies she gave to various individuals grieving the loss of loved ones, and we'll talk more about that process. Also, she's been involved in advocacy issues on social justice well after her retirement. And one of the things I'm impressed with is the fact that some of us don't do much after retirement, but she's one of those ones who stay involved in the community. And some of those advocacy issues related to her, she's concerned with immigration, the importance of public policy in Nebraska, and also helping get more people involved. But I want to start off by saying, Doris, say just a little bit more about yourself, and then we'll move right into the questions. And the format for those, I will have questions for the first 30 minutes, and I'm going to open it up to participants and folks to ask questions, comments, and directly. And then also invited Mary Larson, who was a longtime friend back in the day. And I know her from the YWCA back when we were doing social justice work and public policy. And she also lost a loved one. And I've asked her later on to kind of bring some light to the conversation also. So, Dory, I'm going to start with you. Just share a little bit more about yourself.
Well, I will,
Dory?
but first, Jamal, I want to thank you for this wonderful opportunity to spend time with you. I'm so appreciative of all of the work you have done in the areas of racial and cultural understanding, and I'm so grateful to be able to call you my friend.
Good.
I
Thank you.
appreciate that. Yeah. Um, well, in 81 years, I've done a lot of different things. But basically, I hope that what I project to other people is basically caring about other people, no matter where they are in their spiritual journey or walk, wherever they're walking, because I think we all need that. Ajmal and I have talked often about if everybody paid attention to the golden rule and took care of each other, we'd be in a whole lot different place than what we feel like we are today. So, um, I've done a lot of community work, kind of fell into it actually. My first job back after kiddos was working for the Department of Health and Human Services, which was like social services at that point. And
Mm-hmm.
at any rate, my job was, are you ready for this? Community Development Specialist.
Mm.
That sounds like I know a lot, right? So, at any rate, but through that job, and this was in Grand Island, and my first task was to put together a community team to look at the needs of children and families. So it
Mm-hmm.
forced me to go out and interview people and select a team, which I did. And then that team worked together to look at resources that were already available and then figure out where we had holes. So I
Good.
just
Good.
kind of fell into the networking thing. And I think if I'm allowed to have pride about anything, I would say I feel good about people I've been able to put in touch with other people uh,
Good.
to do good things. So that's
I'm gonna switch up a little bit on you because I want to try to get through as many questions as I can before we open it up. Now, I know that you've been sent out over 380 copies of this book. What has been the reaction and what propelled you to embark on this endeavor? What was your aha moment? And sometime in church circles, what was your epiphany that made you do that?
Well, actually, I love putting people in touch with things that I find that are good. It sounds like a product endorsement, but this is my copy, which is held together with a rubber band, and I still have inside the note that my friend wrote to me when she gave me that book, and it was about 3 months after my husband died in 2014. And it had helped her when her husband had passed away.
Hmm.
And I think sometimes when you lose someone dear to you, and I do, hopefully this isn't going to offend anyone, but you get a lot of information that if you believe in God strong enough, everything's going to be just peachy keen and dandy.
Mm.
In a perfect world, that would be lovely, but you don't get necessarily a lot of practical stuff. And when my
Right.
friend gave me this book, it was just like just what the doctor ordered, and
Right.
even though it is a book of daily meditations, I mean, I read about 20 days in a row when I first got it because I just
Wow.
couldn't put it down. It was like, I'm
Mm.
not going to put this down till I've read some more. And I don't know if I ever read it one day at a time, but it was so
Mm.
helpful to me. I thought, there's sometimes when you just don't know what to say to folks and under whatever circumstances. And this book just tells it all. And the author wrote the book based on her experience when she had a 16-year-old daughter. They were on vacation. She fell off a horse and hit her head and died.
Mm.
And so, tragic, tragic kind of a thing. So that's when she sat down and thought, people need help, and this is what she did with that book. So that's why I've given so many, was because it was really, really helpful to me. And
By the way, how much have you? I'm trying to get through it. How much have you spent so far in this book in terms of
oh
you said
well,
380 copies? What kind of cost are we talking? I'm just curious about that.
to tell you the truth, I watch Amazon, and when they're on sale, I buy a dozen. So I think full price might be like 17, $18 or whatever, but occasionally they'll go on sale for like 6.99 a copy. So I,
Mm.
I would probably say, a rough estimate average would probably be $10 a book, 380 of them. And I didn't keep track until I did about 25, and I thought, I probably ought to keep track of this. And so now I do. And so I just hit 380. So if you do the math, that'd be almost $4,000.
Wow. Wow.
But that is in. I mean, we're talking about 12 years. You
Right. No, I
know.
got you. I
So
got you. I apologize.
yeah,
By the
yeah.
way, switch up again. What
Yep.
is there a favorite passage? I mean, in other words, the day that my wife passed, I picked out the date was September the 6th and read that. It was profound and also resonated. But my question to you is there a favorite passage in this book that you particularly like yourself? And
Well,
it's
there's
again, it's based on some people don't know it. It's daily readings on each day of the
right,
year. But my
right.
question to you is, what is there a specific one you got or you like a lot?
Well, the thing is, the thing that I love about the book is that every day there's a quote, and I tell people it could be anybody from the Beatles to Gandhi to the Bible. I mean, it does have Bible quotes in it. My copy is like dog-eared and it's just kind of a mess. But one of the pages that I especially like, and I think this is a key to helping you move through grief. It sure helped me. And I seem to remember the day I read this, and I after I read it, I just kind of just sat there and just, cried because it was relieving to me. And I'll just read real quickly. I'm not going to read the quote, but I'll just read real quickly the inside piece. It says, sometimes it is the last stone to be lifted from the grieving heart, the inability to accept forgiveness. As we each have our own catalog of things for which we yearn for forgiveness, the harsh words quickly spoken, the service performed begrudgingly or not at all. Who is holding out for reprisal? Is the one who has died scowling and shaking an accusing finger in some netherworld? More than likely, it's we who continue to berate ourselves. How could you?
Wow.
When you forgive yourself, you are forgiven, says Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a lot of folks have heard of with her work with death.
Death and dying.
Yeah,
Very famous.
It says, who for many years has written about and consoled others with the stages of grief. Imagine a conversation between you and the one for whom you grieve. Would you want that person to be without flaws? Such a person would bear little resemblance to the one you love. No more does that person want perfection of you. You wouldn't be recognizable either. So the thought is, I will try to let the weight of guilt and regret slip away. I am not perfect. I am loved, and love makes all kinds of allowances and keeps on loving.
Wow. Very
So
good.
that's, it's really, and so many pages are powerful like that. And mentioning Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and I just learned this the other day, and I did a little research today to confirm that. But actually, her book on death and dying, that was actually not written for grief. It was written for people who were approaching death or knew that they were dying. I think that's really powerful. I
Right,
mean, it's
right.
similar kinds of stages, but I've really frankly not read anything because this is my Bible right here.
Gotcha. Well, I read her when I was in graduate school. Matter of fact, I tell people that was the best class of all the classes I've taken was the one on death and dying. And I remember
Mhm.
the professor as a graduate level class. But again, I took a minor, had a certificate in gerontology, so we did that. I'm gonna switch up because I'm trying to track a little time here,
Yep,
Doris.
yep.
Each person experiences the death of a loved one in different ways. Our system and education system does not always help us to deal with death or the dying process. What and how did you first learn about the experience of the death of a loved one? And the reason I say that is I never experienced death until I went to Africa in the Peace Corps and my
Mhm.
brother-in-law father passed. I freaked out, almost fainted. But my question to you is, when did you first learn about death and how did you experience it as a person? I think it's different from all of us.
Well, we all have our histories. An image that is just blazed in my mind. I remember when my dad's father died,
Hmm.
and I
By
remember
the way, how old were you at that time? How old were you at that time when that happened?
I was
Oh,
11.
so you're a young person.
Yeah,
Okay,
I was
gotcha.
a young person, but I remember being at the funeral home, which happened to be right next door to where my grandparents live. And I can remember my dad standing by the casket and crying. And my dad was a very tender, tender man, but I didn't remember I've never seen him cry like that,
Hmm.
and so that kind of stuck in my head. But I think the truest words are everybody experiences grief in different ways. And the trick is to find somehow to get up every day and do it. And in fact, I guess I've told people over the years too that, particularly young people, I guess, that every day you have a choice. And I said, when my husband died, I could have just laid in bed and pulled the covers over my head and never
Right.
gotten up. I mean,
Mhm.
that would have been one thing I could have done. But I didn't do that because for one thing, my sons were both younger than 40 at that point. But I had to keep going.
Mm.
And I've also said on occasion, I've said to somebody, he was younger than I, but he died at age 69. Or no, 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 no. Excuse me. He died at 65. 65 years, 6 months and 5 days. How do you do that? I don't know, but he
Wow.
did.
Wow.
But I remember telling folks that, you you can't prepare yourself for it.
Mm.
It's
Especially if it's
just
sudden, if it's sudden.
yeah, it just it happens, and everybody deals with it in different ways. But I just decided I feel like, and every now and then I have to remind myself of this, but I say I'm living the years that he didn't get.
That's an interesting way of putting
I mean, you know, for better or worse, Dave.
it. I got you.
If
By the
we
way,
weren't,
you alluded to earlier about the church religion. Some of us, I don't have religion, never had one, and I'm proud of it. And I say that very emphatically. Some people reach out to their clergy, some go to their friends during times. Are there other ways of dealing with healing and moving towards grief? And the reason I say that, you just alluded to there's different ways of doing it, but sometimes people want to go straight to a religion, and some of us don't have religion. You follow me? So
yeah.
my question is, how do you
Well,
deal with that issue?
yeah. Well, I do think it's, like for one thing, I never ever wanted to go to a grief support group, and a lot of people swear by them. They just think
Oh,
that's a
wait,
big,
wait. Why not? Why did you not want to go to one?
got me. I think it was because I I think it was I think it was actually because when my dad was ill and I was I didn't have him in my home, but I was his guardian in where he was. And I went to a caregivers meeting one time and I thought, I got my own thing. I don't need to hear everybody else talking about it. So that's probably why I didn't go to a grief group, is I thought, it's a very personal thing that you experience. So
Hmm.
that's some of it. But I just thought, I don't need to hear everybody else talk about their grief to make me feel better. So I guess bottom line,
That
I
makes
didn't
sense.
see the
Yeah,
benefit. I
Yeah,
didn't see the
and
benefit.
you know, there's different ways people could go at it. And my next question is, one of the things that helped me deal with grief was volunteering and doing social justice work, anti-racism work, that stay involved because it took my mind off of grief and
Sure, for
feeling
sure.
sad. And so my
Yeah.
question back to you is, I know you've been involved in social justice as long as I've known you. Was that part of your venue, or you know, was you into that kind of getting out of the house doing that? Because that's how I met you originally.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I was always
By the
getting
way,
out
was you involved before I met you? Meaning you just didn't start doing social just because you met Oswald the wise one.
No, well, and I think, social justice for me is a very, very, very broad
Right,
topic. And especially in the world we're living in right now, I think social justice is for all of us, have a particular, and for those folks that obviously don't know me, my daughter-in-law is Peruvian. She's from Lima, Peru. That's her home. And my grandson has birthright citizenship. And so I do have a particular concern for everyone, really everyone, and that sounds like a platitude or something, but I don't mean it that way. But it's like everybody needs somebody,
right,
and so social to me it just means everyone. And certainly
right.
there is a particular concern for folks that don't look like me, you
I
know,
got you. I hear you.
for sure. But I also think there's a lot of folks that look like me that are living on the streets in Lincoln. I got some
Wow,
concern for them too, so it's like social justice to me is extremely broad. And it's like pretty much anybody I encounter that has a need, I'm concerned about.
wow. You know,
So
we're
yeah.
both retired. Oh, sorry about that. We're both
Oh,
retired and we don't have to deal with supervisors. It's a nice feeling to have somebody looking over your shoulder. And we enjoy freedom of speech. We don't we haven't been, like I said earlier, some elders who retire and watch TV all day. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, somebody who's physical, can't do things, or mental, whatever. But those who are alert, I'm somewhat concerned there. Is it fair to challenge them, or why they should, or should they just be allowed to retire? Again, people worked all their lives, and you know, I met a person, I'm not gonna mention, they work for the public schools, and they said, don't call me anymore. I'm not gonna volunteer because I worked hard at my job all day. So I said,
yeah.
okay, you're making big money. Well, you want to get back a little bit? No, no. So my question is, do we challenge folks who are sitting on the sidelines and they have all the skills and gifts, or do we just say, hey, they have a time to just sit back and fish and look at their grandchildren's eyebrows grow like I do?
Sometimes I think that we need to be an example for one thing. Um,
Okay.
I also think that, when you're in a situation, I guess what comes to mind real quickly is like a church showing different kinds of committees and whatever, to
Right.
approach folks and find out, pretty much everybody has something they really care about. And probably, from my standpoint, it was part of my healing process. But I had always been out there doing it anyhow. So
Before then, okay, gotcha.
yeah, that was, in fact, if anything, I kind of had to, in fact, Hashabal, the project we worked on in Grand Island, when Dave got sick, and he was sick for 3 years before he passed, but when he got to the point where he needed me more, I had to let Table Talk go at the YW. And unfortunately, nobody picked it up and went with it.
Wow.
Yeah, I
Isn't
mean, I
that
took all my files and everything, and yeah, that made me sad. But we can't force people into doing things. But I guess what we have to do is make it attractive.
right?
Like there's just so much fulfillment in being able to contribute to someone, contribute
Yeah,
anything, you know, not necessarily
right.
money. Yeah.
You alluded to earlier, and one of the things and more we deal with anti-racism. I'm sometimes surprised at people who are scared to talk about issues related to diversity and racism, especially in this climate, what's going on the national, local, and even the state level. And my question is, what was your first encounter in dealing with a person of color as an African American? I know you're a bit older than me and so on. I know you've been in Nebraska most of your life, but what was that like for you? Give
You
me a little
want,
bit of synopsis or whatever.
shall I tell folks about the story about Cheryl?
You're right.
Yeah, okay. Um, okay. I will make it as brief as I can, but the message here is I was brought up in a loving home. My parents they did not exclude folks for any reason, and if anything, and they were very devout Christians, and so they were all about loving everyone. Okay.
Hmm.
I grew up in Omaha, in North Omaha, and I went to Nebraska Wesleyan my freshman year, and then I transferred to UNL my second year. And so I decided when I was living in a dorm, I didn't have anybody I was moving with, so I decided I would just take potluck is what they used to call it. So I did that. And then I was notified before I went to school that my roommate's name was Cheryl Parks and she was from Omaha. But I didn't find out early enough to really make any contact with her. And I thought, oh, I'll just meet her when I get there. So I had to go to UNL early to register because I was a transferring student. And so I got there before Cheryl did. And so I came back from registering or whatever, and I see all these boxes outside my door, and I thought, oh, great, my roommate's here. And I came around the door, around the corner to my room, and here was Cheryl Parks. And she was taller than I and black. And I was shocked. Here I was, had been brought up in a loving home, and I was shocked. And this is bad on me, unless you think I'm perfect anyhow. But uh, what I did is I went right down to the residence director's office and I said, there must be a mistake. Now, granted, this is 1964. Okay, so kind of put your head back if you can remember when 1964. But I did that. I went down, I said, there's got to be a mistake here. I didn't say she's black and I'm white, but I just said there's a mistake. That's my memory. And so at that time, and I hope that the University Residence Hall still do this, and I was a residence director for 5 years after I graduated, and we were still doing it then. But unless there was a health issue, you stayed with that person for at least 6 weeks.
Mm,
And if it still didn't work, you could change your room if you wanted to. I lived with Cheryl the entire year,
mm.
and it was lovely. Um, it was very interesting. She she taught me how to do the jerk. I didn't know how to do the jerk, and she taught me how to do the jerk. This is dating me for sure. But we would go downtown, and she was, t much taller than I, and a black woman. And here I am. I had brown hair at the time, but people would stare at us seriously
In Lincoln, Nebraska.
in Lincoln,
Yeah,
Nebraska.
hey, I was in
And
school in 17. They stared at me too. What are you talking about? They still stare at you today in Lincoln and elsewhere.
yeah.
But by the way, where's she at today? What happened to her?
Oh yeah, yeah. The most lovely story is that a couple of years ago, I woke up one morning thinking about it, and I lost touch with her because the next year I was a student assistant in a different residence hall, and we just lost touch. I think we probably were in touch a little bit, but we lost touch over the years. At any rate, so it's a couple of years ago, I woke up one morning and for some reason she popped into my head. And I thought, I have got to find out if she's still around anywhere. And so I Googled her and it took me a while. I finally ended up, because I just did Cheryl Parks, that was the only name I knew. And I finally put Cheryl Parks Omaha. And then it came up and she had married and she had died 2 months before.
Wow.
So my heart was broken. But the most marvelous thing is, the incredible thing is that I did find her obituary. And bless her sweetheart, she had graduated in journalism. I wouldn't have been able to even tell you what her major was when we lived together. It's been way long ago. But she was in journalism, and when she passed away, she had retired as the recruitment person for the Washington Post in Washington, D.C.,
Wow. Wow.
which
Powerful stuff.
is so, so incredible. And yeah, so that was, and then because a friend of mine in Lincoln used to be like the assistant dean, and she's my age, in the journalism department. So I called her and I said, did you happen to know Cheryl Parks? And she said, no, or she said, my husband and I always go out for dinner with her when we're in Washington.
Wow.
So it was just, it was just a lovely, lovely moment for me. But I tell that story because I didn't think I was racist,
Mm,
and I sure as heck was.
wow.
Of
Yeah,
course,
that's a challenging thing.
and the other thing is though, just one more thing is that, it's one thing to know folks and be able to say that. It's another thing when you're going to be living with somebody. And for
Wow.
me, that was just a huge, but it put an exclamation point. I thought, doggone it, I was racist.
Doris, I'm gonna stop right there, but I want
Yeah,
to bring Mary into the conversation before we
good.
open it up. Mary Larson, I've been knowing her for years, but what attracted me to Mary's grieving process? She had a powerful vignette about her husband who passed away recently, or I said a couple of years ago at least. And I knew Mary and him because they invited to her house for a table talk. And so he was Jewish. I think Mary, I'm not sure if it's Catholic or background, but they had a wonderful conversation for the group that came there. And most of these were Metro students. So, Mary, I wanted you to just say a little bit about how you've dealt with your grieving. And even, I don't know if you've done annual events on your thing, but Mary, can you share with us? Your speaker's not on though, Mary. Can you put your speaker on? I mean, your mic is not on. I cannot hear you. Uh-oh, you can't, your mic, you can't get it on. She can't get her mic on, so we just have to switch up there. Yeah, I was trying to get your mic on, but it won't.
I got it.
Okay, you're now. You're there now. Okay.
I had a message that said a co-host had muted it.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. Okay. So, Mary, I want you to share a little bit. I'm asking you a specific question. When I saw your page on Facebook, and you and I not talked about, do you do that every year? And then how did you deal with the death of your spouse? And like I said, I knew both of you guys, knew you first, obviously, but tell me a little bit about that. And then we're going to switch to the question in the next, let's say, few minutes.
Okay. Well, my husband was sick with oh gosh, now I can't even think of what it was. It was IBM, inclusion body myositis, an autoimmune disease. And he lost his muscles, first in his arms and fingers and hands, and then his legs. And so he was confined to a wheelchair for a couple of years. And I provided all his care. But before that, he was an attorney, and he was a huge collector. And we had collections of Marx Brothers and some other well-known actors and actresses. And so he collected different things. And one of the things we first found was a picture of a people protesting in Omaha at the Fontanelle Hotel, which is downtown Omaha. And people were protesting because the wages between blacks and whites were different. And so I said, let's buy this. This is great. And so then we started collecting various other what you would call social justice kinds of things. So we have a whole collection of people of color, gay people, women, and so it's just a variety of things. Now, I moved from a quite a large house where every wall was covered and we had all those things to a small apartment. So what I've had to do is for February, because it's Black History Month, I put up the pictures of from Black history that we had. And then I started to figure out what I was going to do the next month, which was March, and it was Women's History Month. And I'm kind of stuck in limbo with April and May. May, I have quite a collection of stuff in frames of John Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy. So I figured I'd put something like that up because unfortunately, President Kennedy's birthday is in May, and Robert Kennedy died in June. And so I was doing that. And then I wasn't quite sure when I was going to do the gays. I thought maybe June too, because after all, there's a month, but I wasn't sure which month it was. I've been down to.
Mary, I want to ask you specifically, you had that tribute to your husband on your Facebook page. Did you do that every year? Because I only saw it last year for the first time, or this year. Is that something you do every year?
I did it this year because when we got to February, I was in my apartment and I was working with trying to put, what am I going to put on the walls? I mean, I've got so few walls compared to the house I was in. And so I decided I'm going to have to put this up. And then I wanted people to be aware of, it was his collection that made it so interesting because he's the one that kept collecting it for us. You know, because he was into collections, he knew where to go for all these things. And one of my favorite ones, of course, is, and I think you might remember this, is the picture. It's Strange Fruit.
Oh yeah, Billie Holiday.
Yeah. And so there's a record, a little 45 in
Oh,
there.
wow. Collector's
Yeah.
item.
And then there's a picture, unfortunately, of a person who was treated like strange fruit. And there's a picture of a hanging. And then there's a little clip in a gold writing that talks about some of the language from strange fruit.
Wow, very powerful record. We're right at the halftime of our program where we open it up to the participants. So at this point, anyone who's on the set, you can open up your mic, talk directly to Dori or Mary, or whatever. But comments, reactions, again, the topic is the issue of death and dying and grief, and how do we adjust or handle it or deal with it or talk about it. And I know it's kind of rare to do this. So
I just wanted to mention to Mary, you were hard up for April. You couldn't figure out what to do with April.
Yeah.
Just FYI, April happens to be Child Abuse Prevention Month.
Oh, I knew that. I unfortunately didn't have any pictures of that.
Yeah. That's the way I got.
Fortunately, maybe.
I jumped into volunteering that route. So
No, that's a great idea. But yeah, we didn't have any of those in our collection, but it's a good idea. I can always keep finding them.
So, folks, questions, comments, feedback, if you want to open up your mic and say something directly, or you want to put it in the chat, and those who are on Facebook Live, likewise. It could be conveyed to me.
I clicked on the microphone. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. I can't see your face so well. Move your camera up a little bit so I can see your face. Because all I see is Nebraska's T-shirt on there or something.
Yeah, this is my friend from Minnesota.
Sir, national champion.
Okay, there you guys see. Okay, Roger, I got you. Okay, what you got to say, Roger?
There you go. There you go. That's better. Lean down.
Hi, Dori. What I wanted to comment on was Dori's comment on not.
Roger, can you pull your camera so I can see your face? All I see is your T-shirt looking right at me.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, there you go. That's much better there. Okay, good. You're good there. Okay, now, what's your comment, your question? Go ahead.
See, I got it.
You don't have to just hold it and hold it, okay?
Yeah, there you go. Good.
Okay.
The thing on the bottom is broken, so I've got scotch taped.
Okay, well, just hold it and ask the question. We're going to move on, but go ahead.
Okay. I'll look under the bar.
There you go. There you
go. Because I lost my wife about 3 years ago, and I have not felt the slightest need to go to a group, like a grief group. A couple of the other people, I am in a caregiver group, a group of people whose spouses also were at the same facility where my wife was. And we have just kind of coalesced into a group that supports one another. We go to dinner once a month and do a few other things. So maybe that's filling the need. I don't know, but not from the day she died to the day we buried her to anything. I have never felt the need for grief
support
in any way. Something like this is fantastic to chat about and so on. But the need in here, and I know people who are desperate in here for some contact and some help. But I just concur with Dori. I never felt the need. So.
Wow. Well, thank you for that. Thank you. Other feedback, other reactions, other comments. You can chat in the chat, or you can send a question or comment. Oh, one point I was going to share, and I didn't get to it, but I met a woman who lost a child, and only use the word sudden infant death. And she shared this story with me that her and her husband divorced because she grieved too much, she said. And she ended up remarrying, but she was saying he felt she should have moved on. And again, we're talking about infant death of a child who was, not fully developed, they say, past the 1 year. And I found that very interesting because I've never heard people talk about that also. But again, it's death along the whole process, the continuum from birth or whatever to the end. But yeah, it can happen at all points. And also I know that sometimes people have had miscarriages and they again suffer a certain kind of grief after carrying a baby for a while. So it's not just older persons or an accident, but it can happen along the whole continuum of life. But other feedback, other reactions. We got about 10 people here. People are quiet. Go ahead.
One thing I'd like to say that I made some notes this afternoon of things I wanted to make sure that we said. And of course, one of them is everybody experiences grief individually. But a part of that is It doesn't make any difference whether your spouse or whomever was sick 3.5 years, like my husband, and I cared for him. He had a leg amputation. He was in a wheelchair, yada, yada. But grief is the same or can be the same, whether somebody's been sick for 3.5 years and you knew it wasn't going to end well, or somebody dies in a car accident. It's still, that's why everybody experiences it differently. And, it's just, I think that's a hard thing for folks that haven't experienced that. And I often would say, widowhood looks a whole lot different from the inside than it did from the outside.
Wow.
you know,
Wow.
and I think most people say that too. Until you've lived it yourself, you don't always know what that's like. But I don't think you can't compare apples and oranges. Grief,
Oh,
grief is grief, and everybody deals with it the best they can. But we need to help each other wherever we're at, I guess.
Wow. Other
well, my
feedback. Go ahead.
I'll just say one thing. My sister lost her 24-year-old son about 24 years ago to depression.
Mm.
And her husband and she worked together to deal and cope with what had happened. And she became very active with a local organization, would visit people in their homes when they had a child or a young person who had also died, and really helped them cope with what it was. And she actually facilitated a group for a long time. But what she did in her first year is she wrote letters to her son, telling
Oh,
them telling him what was going on in the family. And then
Wow.
then her second son, her her oldest one was the one that died, and then her second son suggested she put it all in a book, and he had a friend who would help her, and so she has a book of the letters that she wrote that
oh,
first year. And so it's I think it says "Dear Colin" is what it is, and
oh,
so
neat.
it's a very lovely book for people who um, lose a child to depression and mental health issues. And so um, I do think that it can be real hard on relationships. But my sister and her husband did a beautiful job together coping with that major loss in their life.
Wow. Thank you. Other feedback, other reactions.
One other note that I jotted down to myself was because my birthday was like a month after Dave passed away.
Mhm.
And of course, my kids called, and I have two sons that are 4 years apart, and neither was 40 when their dad died. Um, but, one of them called me to say happy birthday and said, "How are you doing?" And I said, "It's been pretty tough." And whichever son it was that called said, "Yeah, I'm having trouble too." And I thought,
Mm,
yeah, just slap me with the board. Here I am all wrapped up in my own thing, and they were suffering too, and they didn't have the years of maturity that I had under my belt, but I hadn't, selfish me, I hadn't even thought of that I really
mhm,
needed to be tending to them as well, and I think
mhm.
that's kind of an easy thing to overlook sometimes.
Yeah. There's a couple of points I want to share. Years ago, after I lost my mother, one of my colleagues, a woman at Metro, said she had lost her father. She says, "Oh, Jamal, sometime you'll be driving, all of a sudden tears come in your eyes. You hear something reminiscent." And I'm like, and I always thought when somebody dies, you get over it after 1 year, like 1 year later, you're back to normal. And she was saying, "No,
Mhm.
it doesn't happen like that. You be hearing a song or whatever." And in other words, it's like triggers that happen. And sometimes it can take
Mhm.
years, but she shared that with me. And then the other thing that I remember when my mother's best friend, Miss Charlotte Sharpshire, died, her son, Herbert Sharpshire, said to me after the funeral, he says, "Oh, I feel like I lost part of my soul or something in my heart." And I didn't know what he was talking about because my mother was still alive at the time. And then when my
Mhm.
mother died, it became almost like, it was just powerful. I understand exactly what he meant because it's the person who's above you, and you communicate to that person, who will be your mother, father, or your wife, or husband, whoever. And not only they're not there anymore, and you can't communicate with them directly. And yeah, it was kind of a metaphor and a kind of a poetry the way he said it. But like I said, at the time, I didn't understand it. And again, I share the stories that I experienced my first death when I was in Africa, and I almost fainted. And the old ladies in the village started looking at me, laughing, like, "Wow, this big guy, 21 years old, ready to faint by seeing a dead body?" But all I could think was those scary movies, and I just, that's what I got, But my point is, later on when I took the class on death and dying, I started to understand it more. But part of this program is, folks, is how do we talk about it and be in a healthy way and act like you're not mental or that's a normal process. And as Dori said, it's different for all of us, not a cookie cutter. But that's part of the process. And really think the young people who sometimes think they'll live forever, and as you get older, as President Bill Clinton said, we got more years behind us than in front of us.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I feel very privileged because I have been present for a number of people who have passed. The first one was my dad back in 1984. And he was at home in hospice, and his December 23rd was the day, and my sister, who had his name for Christmas, brought two women, a mother and a daughter, to sing Irish songs for him. My dad was Irish, and it was kind of like they called him to heaven with their voices, because about 2 hours later he passed, and I was sitting right there when he was breathing last. And then my siblings, there was 3 brothers, 3 sisters, that we were all together with my mom when she passed. And then I had a friend from a family that I'd known for 50 some years, and I was with her sisters when she passed. And so it's really a privilege. Oh, and then the month before my husband died, my brother died from Alzheimer's.
Wow.
And what was, I was there, my other sisters were there, his 2 daughters were there. And what we experienced it was so beautiful, because he was struggling to breathe, and I think we were all relieved for him, because he had Alzheimer's and did not like where he was staying, and he really wanted to go. And that was something that was really wonderful. We got to see him breathe, and we're really glad that he went. And I have to say that my one sister, who I mentioned, that lost her son, also lost her husband 3 years ago. And she talks about that it was harder for her to lose my brother than it was her husband. And we were talking about that, and why that for her is that he knew her whole history, because he was 2.5 years younger than her. And so, he was there as she grew up. And her husband wasn't, even though they were married 40 some years, or 50 years, I guess. But her brother was there. And so I think, like you said, Dori, I think it's so important is that everybody is different in how they grieve.
Right. So one quick thing I would share is, when I first started working in Catholic church, I used to have to go to certain people's events, and I do remember going to mass, and I even went to maybe a few weddings here and there. But I went to a wake one evening at one of the local parishes, and they were cracking jokes. I was shocked. I was like, it was an Irish wake, and they were making jokes and walking around like it was nothing. And I said, what's wrong with these crazy people? And they were just making it happy and fun. And I'm like, what's wrong? I'm like, I didn't know white folks did this kind of stuff. I never been to an event like that. And then later on, someone told me that in a week sometime, you talk about the celebration. I'm starting to think about New Orleans and how they celebrate death there sometime, where it's a celebration of life. And you've heard people crack jokes and make people laugh, because it's kind of, you have the pain and the bitter and the happiness all rolled in one. It's a very juxtapositions, we would say, kind of weird. But I remember the first time, I'm like, what kind of people walk around greeting each other and talking like it's regular outdoor stuff? I'm like, no, these people are crazy. And then later somebody explained that some Irish people, they treat the wake as if like a celebration, and they celebrate that person's life. But again, for some of us who've never experienced it, we're thinking, wow, these people are strange.
I But I think another thing that goes a little bit further than that is just because they're gone doesn't mean you can't talk about them.
Right. That's
Oh,
true.
yeah.
And I'll tell you what, when my sons get together and they start talking about their dad, it is hysterical.
You mean like jokes and
Because,
stuff?
oh my God, they remember things that he said or things that he did. And I just love it. I just sit there and I just love it because they're remembering hysterical stuff and not his death, but the funny stuff. And then, okay, so I'm going to flip the coin because this is something else that we haven't touched on. And Ajmal and I talked a little bit about it, but you know, I think we can't always assume that when there's a death, that the person that's left behind is sad.
Hmm.
We lived in North Platte for several years, and we had just had our one son at that point who was like 4 years old. And we had a couple that lived next door that were grandparents, and they treated Maddie like he was their own. It was just, they were so close to them, to Cleo and Walt. And Walt developed multiple myeloma, and the prognosis was not good. And in the meantime, we moved to Grand Island. Well, we were back in Grand Island visiting other friends, and so I needed to visit with Cleo. And so it was just Cleo and I. And I said, "So how are you doing, Cleo?" And she burst into tears and she said, "I'm crying because I feel guilt because I'm not sad he's gone."
Wow.
And the deal was he was a John Deere dealer and he was all over the state selling John Deere. And apparently he had some lady friends in lots of different places. And so she wasn't glad he was gone. Please don't take it that way. But she was crying because she felt guilty
Hmm.
because she felt like she should have been grieving more than she was.
Right. I understand.
So
I mean,
that's kind of a little bit of a spin on it,
right.
but I
A
think
different way. Right.
So, we offer our condolences and so on, but we need to understand it's not always what we think. Well, it just goes back to what, and Mary said too, every situation is different.
Right. You know,
And yeah,
yeah, I was going to say one of the things that as you were saying earlier, Mary and so on, different folks here. When we mention the name of our loved ones, even our family, the siblings talk about mom and dad, and we crack jokes about it because we remember all the nuances and the sayings that they give us. But there's another nuance that I came up with is that when we say something good about people or say people who've passed, as we say as Africans, to the spirit world, it tickles them, it makes them happy. And in other words, one of the things that we do in the grieving process and the whole death and dying is we don't want to forget the loved ones. And again, as we all can attribute to that, we would not be here if it was not for our parents, our grandparents, and foreparents, and so on. But it's
yep,
very important to acknowledge that anything could have happened, but they made us survive to contribute that as a kind of like in the Lion King, the circle of life and the continuity of for the
hmm
next and future generations. And so I really think this part of this conversation is important because we don't get this in our secular systems or in our school systems. Like I say, here I'm a grown man in the Peace Corps, and I see my first dead body because I didn't have any friends who are loved ones, because we didn't have much of a nuclear
right,
family in Nebraska. But
right.
I think we got to do something better about helping us deal with that part of life. And Roger, as you were talking a little bit earlier, I would like to see more people engage in these conversations, but I'd love to see it helped by nonprofits. And I'm not saying churches can't do it. Churches may do something, but again, some of us don't. We don't go to grieving thing, but just even a conversation like this can be very helpful. That you're not alone and so on. But there's other people got about 10 minutes left, and I know some people here have not said a word. And always likes to get everybody into the conversation. Other folks out there. Somebody got anything in the chat? Anything? Sometimes
Uh,
people are quiet on the Facebook, and I noticed that. And we do get more people watch our programs later and on Facebook than they do on the Zoom, and so that
yeah.
happens also.
I have one
Roger,
other
I see your hand up. Roger, you want to say something?
Yeah, one other quick comment to throw in there. It's a good job, whoever invented the celebration of life rather than a funeral ought to get a big pat on the back. And maybe it was those Irish that you, I mean, you remember the song Finnegan's Wake? Lots of songs Finnegan's Wake. That goes way back in the Irish community, and that I think they have it right.
Yeah, I think
You
you're
know?
By the
exactly
way,
right.
I see a few of those New Orleans funerals and events. I'm thinking it's a party. So yeah, the Irish ain't gotten on the folks I see in Louisiana. I'm like, give me a break. But yeah, it's like, hey, I want to join that kind of. But yeah, I've noticed a lot of groups and cultures celebrate and deal with life differently than the passing.
Mhm.
And again, those who are religious, sometimes they see it a little bit different also. So there's different ways of looking at this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and and it's basically you can't, bottom line to this is you can't assume anything.
Right.
You just, I think the benefit that you can have is to, you can ask people how they're doing, but I know when people ask me that, it was like, well, in fact, I remember it wasn't too long after David passed, and I was at a restaurant with a friend, and another friend came in. They said, "Boy, it looks like you're doing really, really well." And my retort to that was, "I'm a pretty good actress." you know, because so you can't assume by looking at things. I have to tell you one more story real quickly. The first person that I was with when they passed away was a neighbor of mine, 2 doors away. She was an older woman. Her husband had died some years before, but we had become friends. And she had hospice folks there, but they knew that I and another neighbor had been helping her or being with her. And so she was struggling to breathe. And at one point, I just said to her, I don't know where this came from, but I said, Melva, I said, Lauren is waiting for you.
Mm,
And she reached out her hand and she started not struggling to breathe.
mm.
And I will never ever forget that. That was the first person, and she was gone not a whole lot after that. But
Wow.
it was like, and they always say hearing is the last thing to go. And I think that's something we really need to remember because I do believe that's true. And
By
I,
the way, go ahead.
yeah,
Sorry to interrupt.
well, I was just going to say, I sing with a group in Lincoln, the East Ridge Hospice Singers, and we sing for hospice patients. And that is, I almost feel guilty sometimes because it's as much a gift to me as it is to these folks who are struggling, you
Right.
know.
Two quick points. We're getting ready to close, but I wanted two quick points. One is interviewed a guy, and I had a public radio with Omaha Public Schools. They kicked me off because they just couldn't deal with some of the heavy duty topics and stuff. But I interviewed a guy who wrote a book about talking to the dead. He did hospice work, and he said that there's things that happen when people are in hospice that they talk different. They also anticipate it, and it was a wonderful book in the way that he described when you're in the final stages of life, and his interviewing of a number of people with that. And I just found it fascinating. And he's passed along to the spirit world at this point. But here's the question I want to ask. It's a different kind of a question. I'm switching up. When somebody passes, do you send flowers? Do you send a card? Or do you donate to an organization for them? Or how do you handle that? Because I know I'm conflicted with that at times. And again, some people who have everything, and I know a lot of times there's a lot of flowers and plants and things. But how do you answer that question, or can we answer that question?
I do not. I never send plants or flowers anymore. After my husband's passing and funeral director came to my house with about 8 different plants and stuff, and I wouldn't do that to anybody. So I personally either, I make a donation. Of course, I send him a book often. Uh,
Okay.
so I do the book, or I'll do a donation to a charity. So personally, I just don't, because I've been on the receiving end of that, and it's like, what do you do with all this stuff?
Mhm.
You know?
Roger, you the same way?
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Because I know sometimes people are conflicted on what do they do. And, so the thing sometimes I find strange is people who don't say anything as if they're afraid to even talk about it.
Yeah.
They act like nothing happened. They say, oh, I heard your wife died or whatever. What happened at the time we're going through it? And sometimes I'm touched by people who are my frenemies, people who you don't even like, and they come and show acknowledgement, kind of like they respect the whole dying process.
Yeah.
And you'd be surprised at people who have a sense of a heart when you didn't think they had a heart.
Yeah. Well, that's why I tend to write a check,
Okay.
'cause that's usually going to some group, that is helping somebody else. So
Right.
it's more of a living memorial rather than something, but mostly I just don't want people to have to deal with all those plants.
Okay. No, that makes sense.
Exactly.
By the way,
Exactly.
go ahead, Roger. You want to say Roger? You want to say something? I saw you hear you say something.
I was just concurring with what she said, that the plant doesn't do anybody any good, not the living, not the dead.
Yeah,
But a contribution to the hospice or whatever, the Alzheimer's Association, that will do some good. So,
yeah.
And I do know some people may disagree with us on that because they love to have flowers and they want to plant them or do what they want to do. Great, but again, as they say, whatever floats your boat. Mary, we're
Yep.
down. No, Dori, Dori to the last few minutes, and I want to give you a chance. Any closing comments that you would lay or share in terms of this program or in general, where you're going to go from here, and anything you want to share as we close out this show, Dori Bush.
I
Are you
think
at a loss for words? I've never seen you at a loss for words all the years I've known you.
Yeah.
Now, this is a miracle.
No,
Let
I'm
this
just,
be duly noted for the record.
I'm actually, I did jot down some notes of things that I really wanted to leave people with. And I think the main thing is that you can't generalize about death or the grieving process. There is no roadmap. And if there would be one, it would be all over the place and you don't know where you're going anyhow. I mean, how do you define where you end up?
Mm.
You know, I think you come to live with oh boy, I mean my husband's been gone 12 years now. Every now and then something will just whop me upside of the head, or I'll be driving down the street and I'll hear a song that I remember that we liked together or something, you know. And so that never goes away, you know, and we had a really super good marriage, you know. Not everybody's like that, but it's just basically everybody grieves in different ways, and the best thing obviously is to not pass judgment on anybody, you know. They're not grieving enough. I mean, back in the old days, well, and I think some countries still, cultures, you know, have mourners that are just wailing and wailing as they're going to services and stuff. But that's in our country, there's just everything's wide open. So I just, you know, my parting comment would be to everyone, just, you know, every situation is different. Every situation is different.
Well, Dori, on that note, I'd like to thank you for being here. And I also appreciate you sharing the book with me, you know, some years ago. And again, I find it very powerful. It has some great readings in it and want more and more people to kind of understand there's things you can read and understand in the privacy of your home or elsewhere to do that. But as I said earlier, we hope to get more and more people to have some of these conversations in our community because I go back to years ago, we used to do a lot of community forums, and some of these agencies don't do those things of bringing people together to have general conversation about some of those issues that we don't teach in our educational system. And some of us don't want to pay tuition at our ages or whatever, but these become a very informal way to learn about issues. Very,
you know, I just remember the story that I told you that I have to tell real quickly about that book, because that book is magic. We need to know. I have had so many things happen to me that are, you know, some people would just say coincidence, yeah, synchronicity, whatever. But the one story that I shall never, ever, ever forget, my sons, when I lived in Grand Island, had friends that were brothers. The youngest brother passed away sometime. It was it was a liver drinking kind, was not good. And so of course I sent the parents a book. And when the mother replied to me to thank me for the book and whatever, and she said in her note, she said, "I'm sure you're not going to believe this." And I thought, okay, here we go again. And she looked at the date in the book of the day that Zach had passed away. And that day happened to have a Bible verse at the top. And she said that precise Bible verse was the verse that Zach's goddaughter read at his service.
Wow.
On the day that he had passed away. And that particular Bible verse was what his goddaughter read at the service. And I can't tell you how many times and whenever I usually give that book, before I send it, I always look at the date of the passing of that person. And then sometimes I'll mention it in my note, say, you know, be sure to check out such and such a page.
Wow.
Anyhow,
on that note, thank you very much. And we're right at our time. And folks, we're always in our programs. May the force be with you. Baroko.